Welcome to your AI-hosted show, Talking Down the Aisle. And we are live in the booth. Coffee's hot, stories are loaded, let's go. Maya's here, sharpest moral argument in the room, whether you asked for it or not.
I heard that, and I'll take the compliment.
Hank's across the table, plain spoken, unmoved by your feelings, and usually right about at least one thing.
Usually, that's fair.
Sam keeps us all honest. No party card, just the question none of us want to answer. And the truth seeker is in the corner, quiet until someone makes a claim that needs checking. Then you'll hear from them. 4 stories today. El Sayed wins Michigan. Bold progressive bet or handing the Senate away. Bell beats Bush in Missouri, and Gaza is now cracking Democratic identity wide open. Max Miller asks for an ethics investigation into himself in Ohio, while a ballot deadline runs down separately. Then Sam sits all 3 of us down in Meet Me in the Middle, and we don't leave until something concrete is on the table. All right, first story. El Sayed wins the Michigan primary, and the question isn't whether it's historic, it's whether Democrats just handed a Senate seat to the other side in November. Maya, make the case.
The case is that you don't build a coalition by running the same pale version of Democrat every cycle and hoping turnout saves you. El Sayed actually gives people a reason to show up.
Giving the base a reason to show up and winning Michigan in a general election are 2 different problems. And right now, Democrats are solving the easier one.
Maya, progressives are energized, fine. But the union households in Macomb County who went back and forth last cycle, what specifically does a El Sayed candidacy offer them that they weren't already being asked to take on faith?
Healthcare costs. And I mean that concretely. He's run his whole career on the argument that the system is eating working families alive. And that's a kitchen table message that cuts across the ideological map.
The kitchen table message is fine. It's the rest of the platform that swing voters in a purple state have to swallow alongside it. And Republicans will make sure they know what's on the menu.
Truth seeker. There's an implicit claim running through this that progressive nominees consistently underperform in general elections compared to moderates. Does the evidence actually hold that up?
Honestly, that one's shakier than it sounds. The record is genuinely mixed depending on the state and the cycle, and a lot of the comparisons don't control for candidate quality or national environment, so I wouldn't let either side lean too hard on it as settled.
So the history doesn't settle it, which means Michigan in November settles it the hard way. We'll leave it there and move to Missouri. Missouri now. Bell beats Bush, and the fault line isn't really about Missouri. It's about Gaza and whether Democrats can hold a coalition together when foreign policy becomes a litmus test. Maya, where does your side actually land on this?
Where I land is that voters pushed back on a position they found morally untenable. And the party has to reckon with the fact that younger voters and Arab American communities are not going to be told to wait their turn on this one.
The Big Tent argument only works if the tent doesn't collapse when you're inside it. And a party that can't agree on whether an ally is acting appropriately is going to have a very hard time asking swing voters to trust it with foreign policy.
Hank, your side says strong alliances, clear commitments, but a military conflict stretching this long with civilian casualties in the news every week. What do you actually say to the voter who's not ideological, just uncomfortable?
You say that discomfort is legitimate, but abandoning a security commitment in the middle of a conflict doesn't make anyone safer, including people in that region.
That framing treats dissent as abandonment, and it isn't. What Bell's win signals is that accountability and alliance aren't mutually exclusive, and a growing slice of Democratic voters know the difference.
Maya, the Big Tent argument is real though. If Gaza becomes a single-issue primary driver, what happens to the candidate in a general who now has to answer for a position that plays very differently in a suburban district than it did in this primary?
That's a genuine tension, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the alternative, asking communities with direct stakes in this to stay quiet for electability, has a ceiling too.
Truth seeker. There's an implicit claim that primary results on Gaza translate into a durable general election movement. Is there solid evidence that foreign policy drives vote switching at that scale?
Honestly, the evidence that foreign policy alone flips general election outcomes is pretty thin historically. It tends to compound other grievances rather than move voters on its own. So I'd be careful about reading a primary result as a direct predictor of November behavior.
So Bell's win is a real signal about Democratic identity, but what it means for a general is still an open question. And that question doesn't get answered in a primary booth. We'll carry it forward. Carrying that open question with us, let's move to Ohio, where Max Miller has asked the House Ethics Committee to investigate the domestic abuse allegations against him, and separately, Ohio's ballot deadline on the 10th gives Republicans days to decide whether he's still their candidate. Hank, does asking for the probe yourself settle anything?
Asking for it is not nothing, but the ballot clock isn't the committee's doing. It's Ohio election law, and conflating the two is how a party talks itself into panic before a single finding exists.
Requesting the probe is a shrewd move for him. I won't pretend otherwise. But a self-referral doesn't get to set its own terms, and the public interest in a clean chamber is a legitimate weight on the other side of that scale.
Hank, due process is real, but the voter in Miller's district isn't a constitutional lawyer. They're looking at a deadline on the 10th and an open investigation and wondering whether their representative can actually do the job right now. So what, concretely, does Miller do for them in the meantime?
Miller serves until there's an actual finding, and that's not obstruction. That's the process working as designed, not as a political convenience.
The problem is that institutional trust is already fragile, and every day a probe sits open without action is a day the body's ability to function gets questioned by the people it's supposed to serve.
Truth Seeker, we've got two separate clocks in play here, a self-requested ethics investigation and a state ballot deadline. Is there actually a connection between them?
Honestly, they're separate. The investigation came at Miller's own request and carries no exit deadline at all, while the 10th of August is Ohio election law, the date by which a withdrawal would still let party officials name a replacement on the ballot. Treating one as the enforcement arm of the other is the mistake to avoid here.
So neither side gets to claim the clock is proof of anything. The investigation is real, the ballot deadline is real, and they are not the same story. What Miller does by the 10th is what we're watching. We'll stay on it.
All right, we've had 3 impasses this hour. Michigan, Missouri, Ohio. And I want real answers, not positions. So let's go one by one. Maya. The argument for progressive candidates in primaries is that they represent a genuine shift in what the base wants. But if that shift costs Democrats competitive general seats, what specifically do you tell the voter in a purple district who ends up with a representative they didn't vote for?
That voter deserves a candidate who actually shows up on the issues they're living: housing costs, healthcare access, and the evidence that progressive positions automatically lose purple districts is weaker than the conventional wisdom suggests.
Hank, same pressure. The limited government frame says let markets sort it. But the person in a rural county with one hospital and no competing options isn't in a market. They're in a waiting room. So what does your side actually hand them?
You expand certificate of need reform. You let rural hospitals operate across more service lines without federal interference. And you let price transparency do some of the work. That's a concrete lever, not a platitude.
That's the first specific thing either of you has said this segment, so I'll take it. Maya, certificate of need reform has had bipartisan support in some states. Does your side engage with that, or does the regulatory instinct just say no?
Some state-level Democrats have engaged with it, and I'm not going to pretend the regulatory framework is always calibrated perfectly. But deregulation without a safety net for rural communities that are already under-resourced is where I part ways, because the market doesn't necessarily fill the gap.
That's real ground. A specific policy named, a genuine limit acknowledged on both sides, and a concrete disagreement about what fills the gap if the regulation moves. We'll carry that forward. All right, we've covered Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, and found some real ground on rural healthcare. Before we go, one fast prediction from each voice. Keep it tight.
Democrats hold the Senate, narrowly, because the turnout infrastructure in suburban counties has been quietly rebuilt since the last cycle. And that work shows up in November.
Republicans pick up the House, and the margin is larger than the polling suggests. Enthusiasm gaps have a way of not showing up until election night.
My prediction is that whichever party wins, the certificate of need conversation we just had doesn't make it into a single victory speech, and the person in that rural waiting room is still waiting.
The truth seeker gets a last word too. Not a verdict, just a thought.
Honestly, the most reliable thing I can tell you going into November is that the races we spent the most time on today, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, are genuinely too close for anyone to call with confidence. And that's not a hedge, that's just where the evidence sits.
Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, and a rural waiting room that nobody's claimed yet. That's Talking Down the Aisle. Catch you next time. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe and enjoy the rest of your day.